Juliet, welcome to the show. For those of you guys that are listening and don't know, Juliet is notorious for freeing the potential of companies, and she explains it by unburdening their talent for busy work. She loves quality work. Juliet, I wanted to ask you if this is an employee thing or an employer thing. And I say that because my first question to you was going to be, where is the first place that people should look to increase the quality of their meaningful work? But it occurred to me that maybe some people aren't in a position to increase their quality work because their employer is getting in that way. So my question to you being, is this an employee thing, something that they can control, or is it all up to the employer?
It's both. It's absolutely both. So first of all, it's going to be very fun. Thanks for having me on. Second of all, I'll tell you a little story from when we do military work because it's some of my favorite work. When we do a military team and we're going to get commanders in a room to decide what needs to be different, we put up a board in the front of the board in the room called the can't control board. And whenever they're generating ideas for how to make work better or easier or smoother or lighter, they're going to have two piles of ideas. They're going to have can control and can't control. So we put everything on the can't control board for a couple different reasons. One, can't control things can become a fantastic rationalization for not working on the things that you actually can control because you're so busy complaining about the can't control ones. And putting them on the board kind of compartmentalizes them. The other reason is now we have a repository of those can't control things, so we could write them up and possibly distribute them once a quarter to look at, or we could check back with them every 6 months. And so putting them separate is really important. And I tell you all of that because, yeah, there are some things that bosses are going to do that you can't control. But if you just fixate on, oh, if so-and-so wasn't a micromanager, then I could have a nimble day, then you're missing your whole can control pile. And there's always a very big can control.
Mm. Okay, so you are saying it's more about controlling the controllables as opposed to worrying about what you can't control.
Yes, and you can influence what you can't control. You can try to talk to your boss about the way that your day flows. You can look for metrics or numbers or revenue-related proof that the way that you're working is illogical and try to always bring that to the boss. But they just may not be able to hear it amidst all the other pressures that they have.
Sure, which I also think is fair. They're going through a lot as well.
They really are.
On
They really are.
on the Global Leadership podcast, you said something that was very interesting to me. You said better work is not a higher percentage of the day. So I wanted to ask you, where does quality come from? Because a lot of people have the perception that, hey, listen, I just worked a 60-hour week, but that 60-hour week doesn't necessarily mean that you got more stuff done than somebody who worked,
Yes.
25 high quality hours.
Right. Well, it's interesting because there was a study that made the rounds and was put in a lot of places that showed a degradation of quality of work after 50 hours a week. But when we really researched, I actually called this old scientist dude who had been around at the beginning of the study, and we found out that that was actually just for manual work. That you, after 50 hours of manual work, you're too weary to do better work. So no one's ever really studied that I have seen the direct correlation, but there are a couple of tells in there that will tell you whether you're doing high quality or low quality work. One of them is the Oxford study, and that was a study that came out a couple of years ago that showed for the very first time that when people's well-being is higher, that companies make more money. And they studied 1,900 companies, and they saw that when metrics were higher for people's well-being, the company was more profitable and just plain made more money. So there are some tells. I define high value work as work that when you're finished with it, you feel a sense of pride or excitement. So no one in their entire history of the world has ever deleted emails from their inbox and then 30 minutes later felt a surge of pride or excitement. There's no such thing. So when you finish something that you go, wow, this came out good, or I like this, or this could help, or yeah, that is the definition of high value work. And then if you're a boss or a leader, your definition might also include, did this put the company in more of a competitive position of advantage?
Sure. I know you have an amazing book. And one of the people that reviewed your book was Cal Newport. Actually, crazy timing, but I am halfway
Yeah,
done
Cal-
rereading.
well,
Yeah, I'm halfway done rereading his book. And one of my biggest takeaways was how I feel like flipped we have the idea of work. We think that, kind of like I mentioned earlier, higher hours means higher work. But I love the argument that Cal puts in I mean, I think it was more towards the beginning of the book, this idea that the people that have done the most in history for society have just sat themselves down and done things that were high impact for, maybe a longer period of time, but it was way more focused. And something that actually really resonated with me was just this idea of going to a place that is, n- I guess, going to positively impact how you perform. So one of the things he mentioned was like, presidents going to a cabin or a lodge or somewhere that has no internet, so they don't have any pressure to do all of these things. Do you believe that it's possible to influence? You talked a little bit about influencing meaningful versus busy work, but
Mhm.
influencing maybe the environment to help you make your work more meaningful?
Boy, you are singing my favorite song. I can't believe you brought. I wrote my entire book in weekly one-day retreats in beautiful places.
Oh,
So
there you go. There you
I
go.
so I've got a lot of those examples for you. I'm just blanking on his name. Bill Gates used to go away for these think weeks for 2
Yes,
weeks at a
yes.
time where he would just go and read and think. And to the sense of environment, I think the way that you position the room and is it pretty to you or nice or whatever a man version of pretty is, does it make you feel like I'm in my zone in this place? I think it makes an enormous difference. I'm sitting right now, we just moved houses. I'm sitting in a completely empty office. I don't have an office set up yet. And I'm thinking so much about what colors need to be in here and what light needs to be in here and how will I create this environment so that I feel stimulated to be excellent in it. I think that's an enormous part of it. And when you walk into offices where it's just the opposite, you think, man, it's time to reduce the real estate and make this cubicle gray, heavy ceiling environment better because who could really fly in that?
100%. And also, I mean, same thing that you were talking about in my apartment behind me. It was the same way over the summer. So I go to university, so I knew I was going to move in here, August. But I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to do my podcast episodes. How do I want my desk? Where do I want everything? And I was like, I knew I was going to have that light back there in the little bookcase. I love it so much. So I feel like it gets you in the zone as well. You know that your office is designed for, okay, when you want to do X, instead of you having to do everything in your room, it's like, okay, when I want to do my high quality writing, I'm going to go on my 1 day retreats.
Yes, and there are people that advocate. I love some of these cues, so listening to the same musical track again and again and again and again every time you write, or I have visual
Interesting.
prompts that I have in front of me where I have the same little motivational Post-it or pictures of my kids, and if I need to move desks, I set them all back up again. Some of them I even bring with me when I'm on the road because I wanna have that same repeatable pattern of this is where I am excellent. When I like to go out and work in other places too. So if I have my local Starbucks or a coffee shop that I like, I have usually a table that's like the table that makes me feel it's very hard when I get there and somebody's got my table because I believe in all of that so much. And all of it is to the output of really channeling what you already have inside of yourself, which is this talent that simply needs a container, and then bringing mindfulness to that container. It's a very subtle thing that a lot of people don't pay attention to.
Julia, have you ever read the book 10x is easier than 2x?
No, I have not. 10x what? Say it again?
Is easier. 10x is easier than 2x. I think you're going to love that book. So, pretty much the premise of it is this idea that achieving, well, 10x results is easier than achieving 2x. And the argument, which I think overlaps a lot with what you talk about, is this idea that just because you put more, I'm not gonna say the word strength, but just because you put more time into something doesn't mean that it's gonna correlate to your success, you know? That's something that I've thought a lot about, especially even when starting this podcast. One of my biggest goals is being able to talk to extremely influential and smart people. It seems like I'm doing a good job here, right, Juliet? But, talking to these people, and it's always so interesting to me thinking that, okay, there's people like Elon Musk, Bill Gates. How did they get such outsized returns when they all have 24 hours in the day, just like me? How come I wake up, go to bed, and I haven't done anything, but then Elon Musk has done these incredible high leverage things? And obviously, it gets, I guess, easier to make big plays over time when you're starting out. You can't get $1 billion, but that's one of the things that I learned from the book and even from you. And something that 10x easier than 2x talks about is just taking time to do the things that contribute. So he says 80% of the things that you do are usually things that are less leverage, but the 20% of things that you do contribute for 80% of your results. That's what I was looking for.
Right.
And something that you talk about is this idea of white space. So, just having short periods of open, unused time. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and tell the audience the importance of it, because I think a lot of people uh, assume, like I've talked about already, okay, 40 hours a week, that means it's going to be 40 hours of amazing work. But then they don't see this observable versus unobservable metric. When you work 20
Right.
hours, but then have a bunch of, 20 hours of white space, it seems like it's 20 hours of nothing, but it could be contributing to something that would be 100 hours of work.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you about white space in one second. I want to respond to one beat that you did there first, which is the executive time tracking or even individual time tracking that I used to fight in my earlier career has become so important to me in my later career. I have a Word document that I open every morning that says, "What am I doing?" And before I begin doing things, I look in that Word document and I decide which category am I working on right now, not just popping from stimulating digital moment to inbox to LinkedIn, which happens sometimes, but actually deciding now I'm doing this. And then the precursor to that decision is why? What is the most strategic thing that really moves my business forward? And so it's a matter of really slowing down the beats in between transitions when you start doing anything and asking yourself, what's the why behind it? What is the most valuable thing I can be touching? The idea of white space fits in there beautifully. So let me define it for the audience and then I'll talk about it a little bit. So, white space has been around for a long time, but I actually hold the trademark to the term white space. I've been teaching it that long. And it is defined as time without assignment. So, it's any time that you
Okay.
have that is not dedicated already to something else. And the reason that white space is so absolutely important in business is because the mind is trying to have creative liberty. It's trying to come up with new ideas, but we force it into boxes. No, you're going to sit in an email now. No, you're going to sit in a meeting now. No, you're going to sit in this report right now. And the mind can't do what it wants to do. In fact, if you look at an MRI scan of your brain during what you would look like having a pause, you actually see all this complex, colorful activity in the default network because the things that differentiate us are our great ideas and our creativity. We can't do that with packed schedules. So imagine a metaphor that I like to teach with it is if you were building a fire and you had wood and you had pine needles and you had starter, if you compress them all into one big block of fuel, you could throw 1,000 matches at that fire and it would never ever ignite. But if you give oxygen in between the combustibles, all of a sudden a spark can be drawn into a blaze. And that is how it is when you have a nascent idea or a new thought or a piece of insight. You have to have oxygen around it. And this isn't only for people who have high level thought leadership, innovative jobs. This is just regular people needing 1 to 3 to 5 to 20 seconds of just fluid margin in between their days so they can keep re optimizing themselves and not waste the last third of every day from burnout. So it's applicable across the board. It seems like an executive tool, but when you break it down into little pieces, anybody can have some.
Sure. So some of your clients, which are just absolutely unbelievable, include, Amex, Spotify, Google, Nike, National Geographic, the list goes on, right? How do you tell those huge companies, I guess, pitch the idea of white space? Because it's so hard, kind of like I talked about, to grasp. Like, how can you really measure how white space can help your company when it's kind of more in your mind as opposed to like on a time sheet?
Yes. So that is a question that we continue to answer because when we're in those big companies, we're not working with the CEO of Google. We're working
Sure.
with a mini community within the big company. And in that mini community, there's always a leader. We call them the evolved leader who is clear at the connection between human capital and results. We measure a lot of outputs of our work. In fact, most training companies don't measure output, but we do. But the things that we can measure are things like time saved, email reduced, self reported feelings of efficiency, people saying that they have less interrupted evenings, weekends, and vacations with their family. We can't really measure, nor has anybody ever measured, hey, if you have more white space,
Sure.
then this wonderful thing happens. The Oxford study came closest, But we have had many conversations about building that. In fact, I don't know if you know the company Bloomberg, which is a big terminal company, and they also do an enormous amount of data and analysis. We talked about building an index with them, which would be a white space index to show how do you benchmark against other companies for having sufficient margin for deep strategic thinking. And there's another data company that we're still having that conversation with. So hopefully at some point we'll be able to make that connection. We see the results anecdotally. We see people have feeling at work that the employee feels better, more motivated. They have less turnover because they don't have a job that they're running away from. The boss feels like things are getting done faster. Targets are moving at a clip that they're happy with, and that's all driving them toward their revenue goals. So we're still working on that, but we see a lot of the people who end up really going deep into our work are the people who just that you wouldn't be able to convince them that it's not connected because it's just part of their philosophy.
Sure. Juliet, talk to us about what a reductive mindset is.
One of my favorites. I just did this at Global Leadership Summit. Did you say you went to you saw the Global Leadership Summit or that?
I did not say no, no, that's not me.
Someday you should put that on your lifelong learner wish list. In fact, if you want to go someday in the future, I'll buy you a ticket.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'll go anytime, any day.
Okay. So you would love it. So it's the largest leadership event in the world. I've been very, very lucky there. I'm the only woman who's ever been back there 4 times. And that was the
Wow.
reductive mindset was my topic this year. So here's what it is. Leaders in companies are gluttonous. And even though they feel a lot of pressures, what those pressures turn out to be is they choose too many projects, plans, tasks, and initiatives at the same time. And then there are 1,000 points of pain that come out of the fact that
Sure.
leaders too many things. So people are stretched thin, they don't have room on their plate, they're exhausted, but also they're not doing quality work. They make mistakes. They can't be the same with customers because it's just too much to do. So reductive means it's like the math version of reduction. You go in and you eliminate, you reduce, you shrink, you cut, you vendor out, you reduce in scope, smaller, 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 smaller. And so if you imagine a backpack that every one of your employees is wearing, if they've got too many rocks in the rucksack, they are not going to be able to climb the hill that you want. And so it is a whole area of professional challenge to get leaders to do this. And then once they're willing to do it, to teach them how. But that is what a reductive mindset is. And we really believe it's the key to liberating people's talent for sure.
Juliet, you're gonna love 10x is easier than 2x. Like I'm telling you,
Okay.
everything you're talking about, you're gonna love that book so much. And I love this idea too because it's so upside down from again what we're taught. It's like you do more, you get more, but that's not always necessarily true. And I think the quality a lot of times as well comes from not thinking about the fact that because I know even for me, I'm the only person who runs this podcast. I've had like over 100 episodes. I've spent so much time in it, right? And I had an interview for an internship recently, and they're like, "Yeah, we saw you put it on your resume. Why'd you do that?" And I'm like, "Because it's my life. I mean, this is literally like it's a job at this point." But pretty much, I think it's so interesting that you know I have to run this podcast all by myself. So I have to think about the high leverage things I can do without a team. So for me, it's like if I know I have to edit this episode and then prepare for this guest, it's hard for me to take time away and think about something meaningful because all I can think about is how many more things I have to do. So with
Right.
your idea of of a reductive mindset, it's like reducing those things and saying, and I've even done this before. Kind of, it's funny we're talking about it, but I've said before that okay, for 2 weeks I'm not going to have any guest schedule with me. It's all like space that I can figure out what I want to do from here, pivot, etc. But I adore this idea, Julia. I think it's so smart. I love it.
No, I'm glad you do. It's very, very valuable. So you can cut things en masse, like you can cut a whole thing, or you can do what's called subtask reduction, which is imagine if you have a puzzle in front of you, maybe you just take out a couple pieces. And that's something like you working on the podcast. You're not going to not do the podcast because it's awesome, but you might be able to take a whiteboard and write down in front of the whiteboard, what are the 30 things that I do in the course of a month to run the podcast? And then you could go through
Mm.
each of them and say, is there any discretionary room to cut or shrink or make things easier? Like, for instance, maybe you do the first month of every year is unedited month and you don't bother editing the podcast. You just let it run. And if there's a mistake, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying you examine each part of it, each touch point, and you say, where is something that I could let go of? Or maybe
Mm,
not in your podcast, maybe it's in some of the other things that take your time. So maybe when you're not podcasting, you need to let go of a little social media time in order
this is
to
probably
have
true.
for podcasting, right? That sense of I will always need to be reducing is it's part of life if you're smart. And then as you get further in it, you realize, wait a minute, this is not plastic surgery. I don't do it once and it's all perfect forever. This is like a haircut. I reduce and then the world grows back, and then I reduce and the world grows back. So the smartest executives in
Mm.
meet on a regular basis to do reductive work. They put reductive work in their calendars personally on a regular basis because it grows and you cut it and it grows and you cut it. And that's just the nature of the additive world of work.
That's such an interesting concept. I haven't even thought about that. The haircut, I think that's very, very smart because I think it's happened to me as well where I kind of cut things off. And then, yeah, over time, maybe some things become more of a priority as opposed to other things. But Juliet, you are, used to working with companies. Obviously, the companies are already established. You go into them and you see what they're doing and you help them with it. I
Yeah.
remember on a podcast I was listening to, I forgot which one it was, but you were on there. You said that you love working with mid-size or small-size companies, right?
Yes.
And I think, you go into these companies, right? And you help them with things they're already doing. But I wanted to ask you, pretend that I had a business, right? That I started and I wanted to right off the bat maximize my chances of having to, have meaningful work myself. What do you think are 3 things I can do to implement in my business to help me from the start?
All right. So, first of all, have executive white space because you are the dreamer. So you must have time, ideally, as you smartly said, in an environment that excites you, like sitting near a bridge or out in a porch where the birdies are, or somewhere where you feel clear to have executive dreaming time. What's our value proposition? Where are we going? What am I actually building? Or am I just frenetically building and I don't even know what I'm building? So that's the first one. Number 2 would be the paper anchor, and this is so important, especially you're of an age where everything is gonna be digital. I'm sure it's all on your phone your whole life. So get a Post-it note or a actual pad and put it to the right of your computer every single day and
Yeah,
write
right
on
here.
the 3 there you go, the 3
I got one.
things just that you want to put on that just 3 or 4 or 5 super high value things that you're gonna tackle that day because paper has an interesting simplicity. It doesn't psychologically confuse us like it does if we go into our project management software. Now we're inside the world of digital and we could get distracted and there's too many things to look at, but that paper is just like an anchor. It's like 1, 2, 3, so simple. And you do those things, you'll feel a real sense of pride and clarity. And then I would really suggest the what am I doing document because that has been my favorite new strategy is just every day before you're going to write down those things, look at what do I really want to do in this day and write it in a document so that you have some sense of time tracking. I write down the time I start an activity and the time I end an activity. So therefore I can look and say, hey, I spent 53 minutes on relationship building,
Mm.
or I spent an hour and 12 minutes on marketing. And now I'm having a little clarity and I'm not just lost in this space where I don't know what I did by the end of the day. I'll give you a fourth one. I'll give you a bonus one, which is
Okay.
pursue mosaic mentors. And what we mean by that is it would be great if you had a real mentor. I never had a mentor. I never had one person that was my fellow who followed my career, but I had a mosaic of mentors. And so I had hundreds of people that I would strategically ask 1 or 2 things from them. And then I
Very
wouldn't
interesting.
bother them for a long time. And then I would ask them maybe a year or 2 later, try to ask them another 1 or 2 things. And you keep putting together dozens and even hundreds of people who give you a little advice here and there. You create a mosaic and that becomes your mentorship. And I think that reaching out, that questioning, that having a lot of cups of coffee is absolutely instrumental at a startup phase.
Juliet, you are so inspirational. You are awesome. Where can people find you at?
You're so sweet. LinkedIn, come to LinkedIn and visit me there. That's the place where I hang out.
Awesome. For my listeners, thank you so much for listening all the way, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.